Okay, brilliant. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to make a start. Thank you so much for all of your lovely comments already. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah. I'm the founder of Teach to Sleep. I'm a fully qualified baby sleep consultant, and I work with newborns right all the way up until kind of 6-year-olds. So I work with quite a big age range. I've got two little ones of my own. So they are now 2 and 3, Ivy and George, and there's 18 months between them. So I really do get it. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, I had a terrible night's sleep last night. So my poor son, George, he's got his last few teeth coming through and he really struggles with his teeth. And so he woke up a few times. So I am looking a little bit tired this morning. But one of the things that's really important to me is that we are kind of open and honest about sleep, because I think sometimes it's about normalizing sleep. And for some people, they may be sitting there thinking, well, actually, you know, my baby is not normal, or it's really difficult in terms of kind of sleep, when actually it's probably very normal and common for your baby to be waking up often, for little ones to go through phases. So mine generally sleep very well, but every now and again they will go through a phase where they wake up, or they wake up a lot, or they wake up early, and that's really, really normal. And so I think sometimes it's just actually about reframing things and about understanding sleep in terms of kind of normal expectations. So that's a little bit about me. A lot of my kind of sleep philosophy comes from education, and that's because I was a primary school teacher for a long time and a senior lecturer in education. So I've worked in education for over 15 years. And for me, it's really about kind of being responsive, about creating kind of an environment where children, infants can thrive. And so what I'm looking to kind of talk to you all about is different ways of being able to respond to your baby. So I'm not what you would class as a kind of sleep trainer, which often means, but not always, it kind of involves perhaps control crying, leaving a baby to cry, or kind of very strict or generic routines. So they're not things that I do. They're not things that I judge for. We're all parents. We're all kind of in this together, and we judge ourselves enough. So that's not what I'm here for. And everybody is welcome. I'm here to give you a kind of alternative and to really empower you. That's one of my main aims, is so that you feel able to kind of respond to your little one and their needs. And those needs will be forever changing. So it's all very well to have maybe a perfect kind of routine. That will need to change as your little one's needs change. And so if you feel confidence and understanding a little bit more about sleep, but mainly about what your little one needs, which will be individual, it will make a massive difference, and hopefully will be more reassuring. So there's quite a few topics that I want to talk about today. The first one we're going to look at is the 4th trimester. So the 4th trimester is the first 3 months of a baby's life. And it can be quite shocking for the first few months for you and for your baby. It can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster, lots of highs and lows. It can be a really lovely, special time. It can be a mixture of all of that. And basically that time, the 4-month trimester, the 4th trimester, sorry, is about your baby learning to get used to this new environment. So they have gone from being in a womb where all of their needs are met. So they're often kind of rocked to sleep when you're walking, or they're fed to sleep. They haven't really had to actively do anything. And so it's about really supporting your baby during that time and helping them get to grips with these changes. So the bright lights, the noises, very kind of different environment to what they're used to. So often it's about using what they have felt comfortable with in the womb to supporting your baby with this transition. And this can take quite a long time. And that's why things like the feeding to sleep, the rocking to sleep, are all brilliant things to do. They help your baby feel secure, they comfort them, and often they work, which is why we do them. So you don't need to kind of feel that you're creating a rod for your own back, that you shouldn't be doing any of those things. Babies generally need support getting to sleep. Some of them naturally sleep well. And if you've got a baby like that, again, you don't need to worry about not providing that support if they're already kind of happily falling asleep without that support. But most babies during the fourth trimester are going to want to probably sleep on you, have contact naps on you, going to want to be very close to you. And that's really, really normal and common. So the only thing that you really need to focus on there is safe sleep. So the Lullaby Trust, it's got lots of information about how you make sure that your baby is sleeping safely, and how you can reduce the risks of SIDS. So for newborns, you're looking to make sure that any naps in the day are taken in a well-lit room, somewhere you can keep an eye on them. Probably going to want to be on you, but if they're happy going down in their bassinet, no problem with that at all. It's just about you staying close to them and keeping a kind of watchful eye. If you're happy having your baby sleep on you all the time, and it is so special and so lovely, enjoy it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And it doesn't mean that later on they're going to find it kind of harder to sleep without you. So when you're thinking about those naps in the days, the early days and weeks, just know that it's actually really, really common for them to want to be close to you. So the only thing there is thinking about safety. So are they in a safe position? If they're sleeping on you, are you awake? If you want to and you think, right, okay, it's been a few weeks, it's been a few months, I'd like to try and see if we can get some naps somewhere else. It's often helpful if you've got a range of places. So if your baby will sleep in the sling, that's safe, in the pram, on you if you're awake, or somebody else if they're awake, the bassinet. So trying to have a range of different places, but knowing, especially in the early kind of weeks and months, they may well find that difficult. So if you feel like having a go, then go for it. But keep in mind kind of lower expectations. So it may be that you say, right, I'm going to try the bassinet this morning. And it might be that you want them, or they might want to fall asleep on you first, and you try with a kind of transition once they're fast asleep, and perhaps you do a little bit of patting while they're in the bassinet. Or it might be that you feed them, and then you put them into the bassinet and they're awake, and you're offering kind of lots of support there. So it's really about kind of your take on it, and there's no kind of right or wrong, there's no good or bad, but it's knowing that actually during this period they just need a lot of support, and that's okay. And in fact, it's brilliant. So if you've got things that are working for you, that means your baby is able to fall asleep easily because you're offering lots of support, then that's brilliant. So try to kind of get rid of the voice that perhaps is saying something like, you're creating a rod for your own back, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, because that's all responsive parenting. And actually, it's really, really great if you're able to kind of calm your baby down and help them fall asleep. So in terms of what's going to help you with sleep, well, the first thing is kind of getting to know your baby's sleepy signals. So you may already know your baby's signals, and if you do drop me a comment. What do they look like? Often the kind of earlier signals of getting tired is things like going very still. It can be kind of not moving their arms as much if they're a little bit older, looking a bit bored, turning their head to the side. They might kind of start rubbing their eyes. Some get little pink bits here under their eyebrows or here. Some get kind of hiccups. Yeah, range of facial expressions, brilliant. There's all sorts of things that kind of define or help you see when your baby's getting tired. And these can be really helpful for you. Ideally, if you've got a baby who kind of is quite clear with their signals, you'll be able to see before they get overtired that they're starting to need a nap. So perhaps, that's that sign that they're kind of looking away, and it may be at that point you want to see if you can get them to have a sleep. If you, and you will get there at some point, end up with an overtired baby on your hand, so it's incredibly upset, might be arching their back, and you kind of know at that point that the window of natural kind of sleep has been missed. Perhaps we've gone over a little bit. And so at that point, it's about doing anything you can to help your baby get to sleep. So it may be that you're going to do a bit of rocking, a bit of pacing, a bit of patting, feeding, and you might have to go through that cycle of all the different strategies that you've got. They won't know what they want at that point, and it will be really stressful. And it's going to happen quite a few times because it's impossible to catch their sleepy signals, accurately all of the time because they change so often. So it's really just a case of trying at that point when you get to an overtired baby is how much support can you just keep on giving until they fall asleep, and they will eventually fall asleep. Sometimes we put a bit too much onerous on this kind of overtiredness, and so we can get super scared about it. But the older they get, the easier it is to kind of work out when it is they're tired. And some little ones, they'll show you the first signals. So, perhaps they're getting red here, perhaps they're looking away, and they'll need to go to sleep very, very quickly. And that's often the case for younger babies. As they get older, you may notice they may start to yawn. And actually, you've got a good kind of 10-15 minutes before they want to go to sleep. So these sleepy signals are really, really helpful in terms of kind of being able to read your baby and support their sleep needs. In terms of newborns, there's a huge range in sleep needs. So a newborn can need anything from 9 hours to 19 in a 24-hour period, which is obviously huge. And that's why it's important to know that your baby's sleep needs are so individual. So try to see, try not to compare too much if you can. There will be lots of babies who are similar age to yours, but they have very different needs in terms of sleep. And so usually once they're out of that kind of shock period, so the first few weeks, they may take quite long day naps, might be an hour, 2 hours, possibly even 3. But once they kind of have started to get used to their new environment and you're all in the swing of things a little bit more, you tend to find babies do much shorter naps. So they tend to nap anything from kind of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and that's really normal. And so what they're doing is they're taking the sleep they need. And sometimes sleep becomes quite obsessive, mainly when you have a baby. And people can worry that actually they're not able to link their sleep cycles because that's often the length of a sleep cycle. But actually at this age, it's just really, really common. And so they've taken what they need, and you don't need to worry about trying to help them link those sleep cycles. In actual fact, most babies will do this without you doing anything at all, but often it's not until much later. So around about kind of 6 to 8 months, they take this neurological leap and they start to do kind of longer sleeps in the day. And that's often when things become a little bit more consistent, because prior to that, in this 4th trimester, things are generally very inconsistent. You might have a long nap and then a short nap. You might have a long awake window and then a shorter awake window. Now, awake windows are how long they've been awake for after they've taken a nap. So for example, if they have a nap in the morning, let's say they do half an hour, and then they wake up, the awake window is how long they can stay awake until they get tired again. And often newborns will need to sleep every kind of 20, 40 minutes, maybe an hour. And that is very unique to each baby. But there are kind of awake window charts. And you'll see I've got one on my Instagram account. But what I say about them is that if they work for you, brilliant. They can be really useful. But they don't always work for everybody, and they can cause quite a bit of stress. So if your baby doesn't sit into the kind of average age trends for how long they should or are able to be able to stay awake, it can make people feel a bit anxious. But actually, it's much better just to go by their kind of individual awake windows. So if you notice, my baby at the moment can handle being awake about every hour, hour and a half. That's all you really need to know. And, their sleepy signals will help you with that. Now, those awake windows change as they get older, so they tend to be able to stay awake for a bit longer. Some little ones will keep their awake windows quite similar, so in between naps, they'll keep their awake window to about an hour, and others will start with quite a short awake window for the day, and they'll get longer and longer. So they're kind of things that are worth knowing about awake windows. The other thing to know is in terms of kind of naps, is they tend to get a little bit trickier throughout the day. So you may have noticed that the first nap of the day is they often find it easier, so they fall asleep quite quickly and easily. And throughout the day, what's happening is they're getting a little bit overtired. And so the last nap of the day, the last few naps, they might try and fight a little bit more. So they might just need a little bit more support. It doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to drop that nap, but it just means at that point they've got quite a lot of cortisol in their body, they're getting overtired, and they need more help. So if you've got a little one who loves to kind of sleep on you or in the pram, they're the often ones to kind of use when things get a little bit tricky. So that's the kind of a lot of the things to do with the fourth trimester. In terms of bedtime, you may notice that your little one likes to go to bed quite late, so 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Have we got any newborns with us, or kind of a few weeks old? If you can tell us what time your little one tends to go to sleep for the night. It might be midnight, and it's really common to go to bed late. And actually it's quite helpful because newborns tend to only need, let's say, around 9 to 10 hours at night time. And obviously that's broken, they're waking for feeds. But if they go to bed too early, they're going to wake up super early because they're not at the point where they biologically need kind of 12 hours of sleep overnight. So it's something that's worth thinking about in terms of kind of bedtime. Thank you. Yeah, midnight is often a really common one. And that can be really hard because you're shattered. And if you're able to, and you've got a partner and you're able to kind of have a little sleep beforehand, or they can stay up later and you can go to bed, then that can work really well. The later bedtime is it works with their biological clock. And gradually they start to bring that forward. So rather than you thinking, right, I need to make bedtime earlier for them, they'll start showing you their signals. So you'll start to say, oh, okay, hang on a minute now, I see you want to go to bed a little bit earlier. And usually it just kind of gets brought earlier and earlier, gradually. 12 weeks, midnight. Yeah, and that's really common again. It's, you have little ones who prefer being up at night, and you have little ones who prefer waking up early. But the pattern tends to be they will bring it forward earlier and earlier. So it's usually best to kind of wait for them to do that. But if you are struggling with kind of later nights, you can always try just really gradually bringing it forward by kind of 10, 15 minutes to slightly earlier bedtime and just seeing how they go with it. So that's kind of bedtime. We talked a lot about the fourth trimester. I'm going to move on to the kind of next stage now. And the fourth 4-month regression is something that you may have probably heard about. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it. It's one of the most kind of recognised regressions, and that's because there's a difference in their sleep cycles. There's a big kind of change that happens at this point. Now, some people will refer to it as a progression, and that's because we never actually go backwards. We're always moving forwards. And what's happening at that point is their sleep cycles are maturing. So they end up being a little bit more like an adult sleep cycle. And that difference in sleep cycles can really, really affect some babies and not affect others at all. So some babies won't even notice, and you won't notice. So you won't necessarily go through it. So if you haven't got to that point, try not to dread it. If you do go through it, just know that it is a phase. You will come out the other side, but it can be a really difficult one. And it's not going to be permanent in that their new kind of behaviour around sleep isn't how they're going to be. It's just that they're going through quite a challenging phase if they struggle with it. So I'm going to move on from that one. I just wanted to touch on it. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that the self-soothing. How do you know when it's bedtime and not a nap? Okay, I'll come to that one and see if we've got time at the end. So self-soothing is another one that people can get a little bit kind of hung up on. And it's something that as our society, we can tend to be a bit, right, let's do things quicker. So we want to move away from them needing us to fall asleep. We want to put them in their own bedroom. We want them to be able to sleep in a cot by themselves. Then we want them to be able to sleep in a bed by themselves. Independent sleep, independent. And actually, other cultures would look at us and think that we're crazy to do that. And part of it is thinking about your own views as a family, what it is you want, what's realistic. Babies, the actual term self-soothe means to kind of get to self-regulate. And so it's getting yourself from a state of heightened anxiety and being incredibly upset to calming yourself down. Now, that's a really complex thing to do. And so even young children would struggle with that. So babies aren't able to do that. If they cry and cry and cry and they stop and they fall asleep, that's because they've got exhausted. If they are able to get themselves back to sleep, so for example, you may have a baby who is able to kind of wake up, and sometimes if they're not hungry, they're comfortable and they're warm, they may be able to get themselves back to sleep. So they may do something like this with their skin. My son sucks his thumb. They may have a dummy. They may have a comforter. My daughter actually, she likes to play with her belly button. She calls it her buddy, and that gets her back to sleep. And they often learn these skills, and they're more likely to kind of have a really good relationship with sleep if we are offering this support. So as they fall asleep, we are helping them to feel safe and secure, so that eventually, when they wake up in the night and they don't need us, they will be able to get themselves back to sleep. Now, some find that quite easy and some find it really challenging. Usually they go through phases where they're able to do it and they're not. And that's really common. It can be very frustrating as a parent, because you think, hang on a minute, you did it before. What have I, what's changed? What have I done that's wrong? And it's just that they're probably going through something and they need you a little bit more. So it's not that they've kind of unlearnt that skill. It's actually at that point in time, they need you to help them get back to sleep, which is really kind of normal and common and natural. Coming back to the kind of feed to sleep, so people can get a little bit hung up on, moving away from the feed to sleep. So a few things to know about the feed to sleep. One, if it's working for you, I wouldn't give it a second thought. Two, if you find that actually your baby is sleeping pretty well and they're waking up for a feed, they're going back to sleep, you moving away from that feed to sleep so that they go to kind of down to sleep without you isn't necessarily going to stop those wake ups, because actually they're waking up either for food or for comfort. And just because they're able to fall asleep by themselves doesn't mean that it's going to change the nights in any way. So I wouldn't be in a hurry to change that. It may well happen naturally. And so it's not something you need to kind of be working on or worrying about. If you're able to support your little one to sleep, then that's brilliant. If it's that you're supporting them to sleep with something that's becoming really difficult, so for example, you're rocking them to sleep, and they're getting quite big and quite heavy and your back's hurting, then they're things you might want to look at for you and your family. And you can do that very, very gently. Things like rocking a little bit less each night. It might be that you put them to bed slightly earlier or slightly later, and that would help them. Or it might be that you kind of do something like the rock and you stop, rock and you stop. Basically, there are lots of different loving and gentle ways to move away from something if you're finding it difficult. But if it's working for you, then you don't need to be looking at that at all. So quite a lot of kind of things that I've been talking about there in terms of kind of how they fall asleep. So if they've got a way of falling asleep and you're supporting them, brilliant. We've talked about kind of bedtime and that suiting your child and their age and it kind of naturally coming forward. The other thing I want to talk about is related to bedtime. So as your child gets older, the bedtime will tend to get earlier. And having a good bedtime routine, a kind of consistent bedtime routine, can really help with sleep. So the key to kind of a bedtime routine that works is keeping it short. So especially for babies, especially newborns, they have a very short attention span. So, your maximum is a 5-minute routine. So something as simple as changing their nappy, perhaps putting them into some pajamas to show the difference between day and night, dimming the lights, and then probably you're going to feed them to sleep. And that's as simple as you want it. So just a few steps you always do. You then, as they get older, you may add a few things in. So it may be that you want to add in a lullaby, it may be you want to add in a bath. The most important thing is you think about, is it kind of helping with sleep? So some people love the bath and it really helps as part of kind of the relaxing, and it's sort of special family time. But a few things that I always kind of suggest about, or to think about if you're going to include the bath, is one, for adults, it can be very calming and relaxing and it can kind of help us with sleep. But for little ones, they may well be happy in the bath, and then when they come out, they're really cold. And when you're tired and you're really cold, it's very difficult to kind of deal with that. And so they often get very, very upset, and then their little legs are everywhere, and you've got to try and suddenly put them in their pajamas. And what has gone from, being a very calm, relaxing time has become quite stressful. And so then you're having to do everything very, very quickly. And you're also very tired at that point. So I would think about having the bath separately, so maybe much earlier, and keeping the bedtime routine quite short and succinct. So adding something in simpler, like a kind of lullaby, a story if they're up for that, some cuddle time, plenty of time for kind of feeding or rocking or sitting with them, whatever it is you're going to do to help them fall asleep. But actually keeping that routine short but consistent, so that you do things in a particular order, because that will really help them feel secure, because they'll know what's coming, and that predictability will help in terms of kind of being calm and feeling regulated, because they know what's going to come. So when it comes to the bedtime, just keep looking at it, reevaluating, is it working for all of you? Ideally, if you're able to kind of see that actually your little one is going through the whole of the routine and is relatively calm, and then goes to sleep fairly easily, then it's probably working. But if you notice they're getting quite overtired in that routine, it's worth either sticking to the routine if you feel it's working in terms of the stages, and just bringing bedtime a little bit earlier, because sometimes we can plan our bedtime routine and you think in your head, oh, that takes what, 5-10 minutes, but actually when you're doing it and you look at the clock, you realize everything with little ones takes a bit longer. So it may be a case of just starting a little bit earlier. Now, when it comes to bedtime, it's a good idea to kind of start dimming things down before you start the bedtime routine. So you're signaling, we're getting ready for nighttime, everything's calming down a little bit, kind of quieter voices. And then when it comes to kind of the end of the bedtime routine and your nighttime environment, ideally that's going to be pitch black, because that really helps kind of sleep science in terms of helping the hormone and the sleepy hormone melatonin to be released. So you want a pitch black environment. If you're feeding or changing any nappies, ideally you've got kind of a low dim light, which then goes off. You also want it to be warm and comfortable. So the Lullaby Trust recommends 16 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees. And you may have a kind of room thermometer, or you might look at the Grow company in terms of kind of how many sleep suits layers they should be wearing. But generally a kind of rule of thumb is thinking about putting your finger down here, so it's in their skin here, and you can feel whether they're cold or not, because you want to make sure, one, they're not too hot to reduce the risks of SIDS, but that they are comfortable. So temperature is warm and comfortable, pitch black. And then in terms of noise, you're either going to go for kind of silence, or you may have introduced already white noise. So white noise mimics the noise we hear in the womb. So often it can be quite reassuring, but also it can really help in terms of being a sleep signifier, sleep association. So if you're going to use it, it's good to kind of turn it on before they fall asleep, so they can start listening to that noise and knowing sleep is going to come. You want to make sure that it's not too close to the baby's head or their ear, so it's far away from them in terms of the room. It's not uncomfortably loud. And then ideally you keep it on consistently throughout the night, because again, what you're trying to kind of emulate is the same environment as the womb. So when they wake up, if they're not hungry and they're not wet or uncomfortable and they don't need comfort or you, there's more likely they may well just go back to sleep. It's also a good one if you've got noises that you can't control. So things like kind of noisy neighbours, or you getting up to go to the toilet, or the boiler coming on, whatever it is. Sometimes white noise can be really handy. It's very much a kind of personal preference. So that's the kind of bedroom environment. What can we help in terms of sleep? So you've got your sleepy hormones there. You've got your melatonin, which tends to kind of peak around 7, 8 o'clock, and that kind of starts to peter out the early hours of the morning, and that's when you've got your cortisol coming in. So you may well notice that your little one finds it harder to get back to sleep from around 3 a.m. and that's completely normal. So they probably just need more support at that point. And I always recommend kind of getting to them as quick as you possibly can. The quicker you get to them, the easier it will be to kind of help them regulate and soothe them. So a question just popped up there in terms of projector lights. So they're very stimulating, so I don't recommend them. They can be great for a bit of kind of, let's say, entertainment during the day. But in terms of sleep, they're not recommended because they stimulate the body, and that light starts to kind of help produce the cortisol, which is the wake up hormone. So it may be that you want to use it as part of a kind of bedtime routine, and you have it on at that point if it's not too stimulating. But otherwise, I'd have it as another kind of little activity. Any other kind of questions in terms of bedtime environment? In terms of what lullabies, so again, it's personal preference. Lullabies are quite nice if you're doing so, perhaps having the lullabies on as you're changing your little one and putting them into their sleep suit or pajamas as a signal. Again, they can be quite stimulating if it's something you're playing while they're asleep. So, you know, generally I would say go for quite a monotonous noise once they're actually asleep. In terms of pitch black, yeah, thank you. That's a great question for naps. So newborns, anything up to kind of 12 weeks, 4 months, can take their naps in the daylight, and they should, so you can keep an eye on them. And the reason for that is you don't need to worry about the kind of the dark and the light, because the sleepy hormones are only affected at night. So in terms of what helps the naps happen is actually sleep pressure. So sleep pressure starts to build in the daytime. The younger the baby is, usually the sleep pressure will build quite quickly, and they'll need a nap, you know, within about an hour. And that's what's going to help them get to sleep. They won't need it to be dark. As they get older, and they kind of get a little bit more consistent in terms of naps, and perhaps they're napping kind of in their bedroom, or even they're napping kind of out in the cot. Some really like it dark. I know kind of mine do, and I've always drawn the curtains. It's part of the kind of, we do a bit of a mini nap routine. It's signaling that sleep's coming. Some don't like it, and they'll actually, as they get older, they'll say they want the curtains open. But often it can help as they get older for napping, but it's not essential. And for newborns and little babies, definitely not. So naps happen kind of in the daylight where you can keep an eye on them. And it's not needed kind of biologically for naps in the daytime. Thank you. Lots of great questions there. So what else did I want to cover? So things like routine. So lots of people will kind of start to think about routines, and I know worry about routines and what they should be following. What I always say for newborns in that 4th trimester especially is you don't need to worry about a routine. And if you can, just enjoy the fact that you don't need to, because once they get older, it's kind of something that they want and they need, and actually sometimes you can be restricted by that. So for the early days and weeks and months, just go by them. Once they start showing consistency and you can kind of predict when they need to have a nap, that's the time that it may be really helpful to kind of pay attention to the rough times that they need to have a sleep, and see if you can help them with that and kind of predict when they're going to happen. Best time to move into their own bedroom. So the Lullaby Trust, for safety reasons, recommends from 6 months. You don't have to move them at 6 months. You can keep them in, you know, your bedroom, and it is very much a kind of personal choice. I'm going to just finish up my talk, and then I will see if I can scroll through some of your questions. I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anything in terms of content. And I think that's pretty much it. So let me see if I can have a look at those some of those questions. So We talked about best time to moving into their own room. Just on that, so obviously the Lullaby Trust recommends from 6 months. But I would say, so say you're getting ready for them to move, you feel like it's safe, make sure they're in a kind of good phase. So they're not perhaps teething, they're not going through any kind of separation anxiety. They feel like there's no big changes and you can see they're in a good place. That might be the time to start. And you might want to, you don't have to, you might want to start by doing kind of playtime in there so they get used to their own room. You might want to take a nap in there with them. You know, they may be happy doing one without you, but just slowly kind of build up to that. How can you encourage longer 2-hour nap in the middle of the day? Maybe baby never naps for more than 40 minutes. So that's I'm not sure, Nicola, how old your little one is, but that's what I was talking about kind of earlier on, is that those short naps are very common, and it's often all they need. But that as they get older, so usually between 6 to 8 months, they naturally extend those. And so 6 months, yeah, so it's probably coming, Nicola, and you probably don't need to do anything about it. If you do want to do something about it, and so what I normally recommend is say they're having a short nap, the kind of 40 minutes, 30 minutes, and they wake up and you can just see they're still shattered. They're not going to have a good day. They're kind of, you know, they're still crying a good kind of 10 minutes after they've woken up, even though you've tried to get them back to sleep. They're not having it. I've got a kind of much longer video which is in my Facebook group, which basically goes through some different strategies that you can do to try and extend those naps. Now, you don't need to do this, they most likely are going to happen naturally, but if you feel that actually they just really need that, then you might want to go and look at that video. But one of those strategies that I talk about, which is what I did with my son for a long time, is that he would wake up 30 minutes on the dot, and there would be no kind of getting him back to sleep at that point. And I would just take him out of his room, I'd take him out of his sleeping bag, we would go downstairs, we would do something different, and I would just wait for him to show me his sleepy signals. Now, sometimes that would be kind of 15 minutes later, maybe half an hour. And you feel a bit crazy because then I think I'm just putting him to bed all of the time. But actually, I'd take him upstairs and he'd go straight down to sleep and have another half an hour. And actually, kind of a month of that, maybe a little bit longer, you just naturally linked those kind of two cycles together. So that for me, you know, as I had my daughter at that point, it was just much easier. You don't necessarily want to be spending a long time trying to extend naps. And there are kind of lots of tips and tricks, but they don't always work. And sometimes it can mean that you get a bit kind of more obsessed about sleep and you can spend a long time trying to do something which is naturally going to happen. But like I said, there is a longer video in my Facebook group if you wanted to have a look at that. So I think we're kind of coming to the end now. There's a few things that I want to kind of wrap up on. And the main thing is you really are the expert in your baby. So I may know about sleep, but whenever I work one-to-one with a family, it's very much about kind of getting to know your little one and what their individual needs are. So you will be best placed to know that. Always go by your instincts. You may well have a little one who likes to sleep more than others or who likes to sleep less than others. And actually, it's much better to go with what they naturally need than trying to kind of fit into the norm or the average, because you'll find the whole sleep journey much easier. If you're looking for any other kind of sleep talks or resources, then I've got lots of free kind of talks in my Teach to Sleep Facebook group. On my Instagram, I do a Q&A session once a week on my stories. I also do live Q&As on my grid, and I also offer kind of one-to-one support as well as workshops. So I hope that is going to give you lots of other resources to look at. I hope that you found it helpful. If you have, please do give me a thumbs up and any comments once you have kind of had a chance to watch the whole thing if you're having a watch later on. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for all of your fabulous questions and comments so far. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.